just in preparation for the exam. So I'm still working on, because we don't exactly know what cases we're going to do yet, but you have this question I showed y'all before, using your class notes and the printed class notes. I hope you're taking some good class notes here. So this is a required question. Talk about one of the major risks and two of the minor risks. It's that whole measure, measure, or define, measure, mitigate. And then one of the following three. So you got three questions. Two of them we covered, the standard deviation, correlation, diversification, does it work? That whole discussion we had. And then we're finishing up Annie Duke tonight and a little bit of Hubbard tonight. So picking two of those. This one, there's nothing to pick from. That's just the question. And then case studies is what we're going to do that the rest of the semester. So we'll probably cover most of these. I'm trying to get the airline to show up Thursday night, but he hasn't emailed me back. I've emailed him, so I'm hoping he's going to be here. We did ERCOT 2 years ago. Last year I didn't have a special case, so he shows up Thursday. Don't have your cell phones out. All right, we have some smartphone zombies in this class, and it makes me hate teaching, but it's even worse for a guest. So I know y'all don't, students want to demoralize the professors, that's fine, but don't demoralize a guest. He may not be here in person. I'm not sure yet. He said he might, but he hasn't gotten back to me. So I'm going to keep trying. I'll probably email him from my UTSA account. So no phones, even computers. It's just take notes. I haven't gotten word from him yet if he's going to let me record the class, because obviously he might not want it recorded. And so we'll have some of those. So you have to pick two of those cases. Usually the outside speaker is one of the easiest cases to do, because there's not as much volume of stuff. So it's not much I can be too harsh on you. And then you got the credit spread question, which is very straightforward. We did 2 or 3 of those in class. And then the value risk problem, which was probably seemed easy when we did them, but you haven't looked at one in a while. So you have to go back. I've got an example one there, and you got videos. I actually got a couple examples. So that is the final. Be careful. I had one student would have made a A in the class, but he only did one. He did 1 and 1, and that was just enough to kick him. I was like, I saw him afterwards when he was graduating. It's like, why'd you do? Oh, I didn't realize. Like, yeah, that would have been just enough points. All right. So questions on that. So you could essentially go ahead and prepare for the final if you're not going to do one of the case, if you're not going to do the case studies, because you have everything except for, we'll finish up Annie Duke tonight. So you have essentially, if you do the first question, you can go ahead and do it. You can definitely start preparing that first question there and start working on the math problems. All right, so our final is really, really early. It's like 2 days after our last class. So there's not like study days or anything. But the essays, I'm giving you more time on the essays. However, if you have it early, send it early. I grade like, it's well over 500 papers last week, and it's just a lot. So I just spread it out. I do like 50 a day. Is about the most I can do. And so I'm just moving. So if you have it earlier, turn it in earlier.
So we can like submit the essay questions.
Yeah, anytime, once I have it set up on Blackboard. Yeah. All right. And the 2 math questions are completely closed book, just calculators and blank pieces of paper. So, all right. I'll try to get that on them. I'm waiting to see what happens with our airline person. I'm hoping y'all may have completely forgotten about Southwest Airlines and its whole blow up, but it's still pretty fresh out there. All right. So let's finish up Annie Duke. Oops. Sorry. So we're talking about motivated reasoning, and the key is to be real picky on facts. Don't allow biases to control what you listen to and what you believe, especially, just be brutally honest. I think brutal honesty is maybe the most important key to risk management. But like I was saying, just on Facebook, just preparing for doing this presentation one time, I thought I could find 2 or 3, and there's just so many of the things people post. I'll just give you one other. It's just sometimes, so I'm a big fan of Bayesian logic. Just you have a base case, and if something contradicts it, your first question is this true? You start questioning it. But some people, when we have a bias, we believe something, when we see something confirms it, we just believe it without any research. So one lady from my church, she posted about Pepsi put the Pledge of Allegiance on their Coke, but they left under God off of it. So the first thing that hits my mind is that would be a really stupid thing for Pepsi to do. Why would they do? Isn't that just illogical, right? Can you imagine Pepsi's board going, "Hey, let's put the whole thing out there, but let's intentionally leave under God off because I want to upset anybody." That seems pretty stupid. So I Google it, and I find some sites, and the one that looked like it was probably pretty accurate said it wasn't Pepsi, it was Dr. Pepper. And after 9/11, they didn't put the Pledge of Allegiance, they just said one nation, indivisible. So those are the words they put up. That seemed pretty reasonable to me. They took it down right after they got complaints, so people did complain. It's like a big deal. It was a really small deal. And like Pepsi's taking all this heat, and there's and she's linking, but she never checked it. And why didn't she check it? But shouldn't it have been obvious to her that this probably could be wrong? Don't you think? Wouldn't that be obvious? But what is her reasoning? Oh, we got this culture war, everybody's against us. That fits perfectly with that. It makes us feel good if we're the ones being attacked. We kind of, so you can't do that in finance. You can't do that in investing. Your mind has got to be, what is the truth? What are the facts? And you got to be brutal about it. But yeah, what we believe on first hearing is, so we're much less open-minded. We think, I'm sure I am. Boy, I'm sure I'm convinced on stuff. There's no way I can be right. And we talked about this before. It's type 1, type 2 errors, maybe worse. We're geared for making certain types of errors because it's safer to do that. We do seek out evidence confirming what we already believe because it just makes us feel good about ourselves. We rarely challenge the validity of confirming evidence and often actively discredit information. So one thing I do is, and it's painful, you may not be able to do this. It's not fun for me, but if I say a book written that contradicts something I strongly believe, I force myself to read it. And boy, sometimes it's like, I don't want to do this. I've already put that in the box. That's decided, but I'll do it. And sometimes it's pretty amazing. One lady, I said, don't read that book. He believes this. He may change your opinion. I was like, well, and I should read it, right? I mean, that would be pretty good. I read Albert Woodfox's book, which I highly recommend, but I really didn't want to read it because I knew his background, and he was part of the Black Panthers. But when I was a kid, they were like this anti-capitalist group, and that's kind of I don't want to read that. He's going to be all this socialism stuff and all that. But boy, I love the book. I thought it was great. My view of Black Panthers radically changed after reading the book. I don't know if y'all read his book yet. He's passed away, unfortunately, but he's in prison for decades for a crime he didn't commit. And it's a thick book, and I'm thinking, what can he? He held the record for the longest person in solitary confinement. So I was thinking, okay, what's the book going to be? Okay, it was really boring today. And then next day, really boring today. I just sat in my cell, but that wasn't it at all. It was really quite fascinating. So I came away with very different. Now did I change, become a socialist? No, I rejected that part of what he wrote, but I got so much out of everything else he wrote. It was really pretty amazing book. Strongly, highly recommend the book. But I took the risk to read it, and yeah, it did change my opinion. It didn't radically change who I was. So, read, to have your opinions change, be willing to go on. I've gotten more, so I'm reading more and more controversial books. I'll see these people that are, really controversial in the news, and they usually sit there interviewed with their book behind them. And so I say, yeah, okay, I guess I'll read them. I'll see what they have to say. And, who knows? In 3 years, you'll see me and I'll be some radical either side, who knows? So fake news. She says fake news, the goal of fake news is not to change people's minds. The goal of fake news is to solidify the people already in their camp, as it really changes minds. Most of my friends tend to be conservative, and I was thinking, reading, it's like, man, we're really not very good thinking people. So I was kind of worried. So then I went on some of my leftist friends' web pages, and they're saying, yeah, we're all horrible. We're all in this kind of echo chamber, and we all think we're so brilliant, and the other side's so stupid, and we're all, it's just amazing. So so the goal is to strengthen what we already believe. Disinformation is even more powerful when some of the information is confirmed. This is pretty powerful. My mom got cooked by this one on the Affordable Care Act. She sent it out to all her relatives, and some of it was this really impressive video, just very professionally made, and a lot of it was true. And you knew it's true. So you see that some of it's true, you kind of got thinking, oh, this whole thing's true. Well, then they got this part that I was going, there's no way that's true. So I had to look up that part of the law, and it wasn't even there. What they said was there, and it wasn't, and it had nothing to do with what they were talking about. So it kind of like the first half was kind of true, and then the second half they just started making stuff up. So it was that's how they get you, just a little bit of truth, and then wham, they hit you with stuff. I don't know how far you take it, so I don't want to step on any toes. But the first time I heard about the flat Earth society, anybody flat earthers in here? Am I stepping on? I thought it was a joke. I didn't. There's no way. Now, can I prove to you that the world is round? I'd probably show you pictures from space of the round Earth, and then they say those are all fake. Can I actually prove it? Can any of y'all prove to me the world is round? Undefended. Do you believe the world is round? You're pretty confident, right? But there are flat. So that's one. I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm going to take the world's round. I don't have time, because we don't have time to research all of this stuff. But could it possibly be flat? I don't know. It doesn't really change how I'm going to live my life anyway. So, that's one. It's like, if I get that one wrong, I'm probably okay. It's not like a world changer, and it's world changing, but anyway, so you have to decide where you're going to go in. But there's obviously some issues that we have that, especially economics and finance type of issues. And I'm a big fan of Friedman. I read his stuff, but I've read Marx. It's found it interesting. It's kind of interesting in places and really boring most of it. Same thing with Adam Smith. But yeah, is it dangerous to read stuff like that? I don't think it is. It gives you an idea of what someone else thinks, but you have to decide where you're going to go. But especially finance and economics, if you have certain economic theories you're strongly convinced of, then go read the other side and just see what their arguments are. And that's kind of it. How do you, this might be the question: what do you believe today that you radically were in the opposite side on 5 years ago? And is there anything like that out there? And why not? I'm pretty convinced I'm wrong on everything I believe, because the world's so complicated. There's no way I could possibly be right. But I'm willing to admit at least that. But will I change my opinion on things? I've read some stuff that has gotten me thinking, definitely. And the more you know about it, the worse it might be. So there's been tests. So what they did is they tried non-controversial issues and controversial issues. So here they say skin creams. Can we agree skin creams is non-controversial? There you go, protesting skin creams. And then gun control. And smarter people did better at assessing data on non-controversial issues, but they were worse on the controversial issues. Why? Because of all that confidence in their intelligence, and they just couldn't see past their biases. So we're wired to protect our beliefs, and intelligence and awareness of biases do not rescue us. This is a lot of this is Kahneman, no question. That's Jesus taking to another level. But in finance, this is death. This will destroy your career if you can't somehow figure out how to get over these long-held beliefs. So how do you get over all this stuff? So we saw what Kahneman, I gave you his article, ask questions and 3 different types of questions. So here's what she says is the way to get around this. So she starts off with using betting language, skin in the game. So want to bet is a good way to challenge assumptions. If we can put skin in the game, I was listening to someone, I forget who it was, but just who was it? But you don't even have to actually even have skin in the game. You just have to have the simulation of skin in the game, and people will make better decisions, better assessments. It's probably Hubbard, right? Didn't he say that? That was in the Hubbard video. I just not remember. Yeah, so he was talking about that. The more serious vetting we do before deciding will be the result. I mean, if we have something more than just we're stating our opinion with no consequences. Anonymous betting markets do better than peer review processes, 71% versus 58. So people have actually tested this. We need to place probabilities on our beliefs. The more we do this, the better we will become at assigning probabilities and ranges. This is very much what not what Hubbard is talking about, is actually train yourself by just actually even doing tests. So he calls it calibration. So figure out where you are right now, and then practice and practice so you start assigning the correct probabilities. His argument is you can assign probabilities, but they're going to be way too optimistic. You're going to have far more confidence than you should. You saw that in his graph. So acknowledging uncertainties is the first step to measuring it, and narrowing it makes us more open-minded. So start with want to bet. You might try this. I was tempted with the Whoopi Goldberg one I mentioned. I didn't do the Dr. Pepper one or the Pepsi one, because it's a very sweet lady in my church. So I don't want to can you imagine here? I'm hounding her on Facebook, and it's like, Ron, I can't believe this. She's probably 80 something years old. So she can get away with it. So I say, we want to bet if that's right or wrong, but you might try it and just see. Well, people, if you put money on the line, maybe it's illegal. So just say, hey, I'll give $100 to your charity. If you're right, you give $100 to my charity if I'm right. Do you think that would make them stop and reassess what they're saying, or would they say, no, I'm absolutely sure? And then start assigning probabilities up front. Let your mind know. And then the Hubbard thing of calibrate that, see if you're even good at putting probabilities on things. One thing you might do is join some of these probability websites and start collecting your data, see how good you are at projecting things and assessing things. I don't know, have any of y'all done some of the sporting ones? They're pretty cool. I'm not sure exactly what they mean. I don't know if I can find a good one. What was a good close game here recently? Maybe the Super Bowl? Oh, wow, there's Popovich. Speaking of good sporting teams from the past. I have all the stuff from Facebook coming up, the Spurs, wow, it's won 10 in a row. Spurs just won and Duncan only scored like 20 points. Wow. It's like good old days. All right. So what exactly does this win probability mean? Is that the probability that they'll win, or is that the percentage of people who think they will win? Do y'all know? Here, the score is 35-27. They're only down by 8. Does KC really have an 89% chance of winning, or does it just an 89% think? That's a big difference, isn't there? How many percentage? So what percentage do you think they're going to win? It's probably 60, 65, right? This is the NFL. I don't know who has the ball there. Second 11 at the Philadelphia 35. So obviously at the end, they're expected to win, but really close game, something could happen there. But understanding exactly what probability you're putting down there is kind of a big difference. These kind of interesting. I love watching these things. I do watch them all the time. I think it's the probability they're going to win, because the team that's ahead always has a much higher probability than I would think the win chance is. They can be 5 points in the first half, and they have like this 70% probability. Say, no, that's not true. But this kind of stuff's going on all the time. I don't know how you get into this. Any of y'all participating in this? Is this one person? Is this 1,000 people? Is this some database you can log into? Anybody know? Where does this come from? Yeah, but who is that? That's why I don't think this is one person, because I wouldn't assign those probabilities. And for most games, I don't mean just here, but I wouldn't assign those probabilities. That, you're up by 8 points, I wouldn't give them a 90% chance of winning. But if it is, I don't know if it's coming from some bookie somewhere or whatever. Hubbard says bookies are pretty good at this. Who knows? To me, it's fun when there's like you can imagine the Seattle game, what this looked at the end of the Seattle game. It was like way down and shot back up. It's pretty interesting stuff. But if you participate in stuff like this and start collecting data, just see how good is your probabilistic assignment. Are you really good at it? Are you really bad at it? I would have said, since finance is a lot about assigning probabilities and making bets with other people's money, that you probably want to figure out if you're good at it or not. Wouldn't that be important? This is your career. And try to see if you're not a little overconfident in your abilities. That would probably be a good thing to figure out. And so, yeah, Doug Hubbard does that in his. So just acknowledging uncertainty is the first step to getting better at it. And then change your language. So start sentences with, in my opinion, I believe. Add probabilities such as, I believe this to be true, but I'm only 70%. I remember I wrote something about the stimulus checks because I was really worried about what they were going to do inflationary wise and other things. But I try real carefully. I don't do much of this on Facebook. I like Facebook to be cat pictures and flowers and, you know, your plate of food or whatever interesting stuff. Every once in a while, though, I'll venture out. And so I just thought that first 1,200, I was just irritated that, you know, I'm independently wealthy. I'm retired at 46, and my government sent me a $1,200 check. I just thought that was really stupid. So I wrote that, but I try to say, in my opinion, I believe, and one of my friends shared it. So I noticed on his side, one of his friends, he took one of my arguments, he repeated it, and he said, period, and then he goes, false in all caps. And that was his entire argument against me. And I thought, well, that's a pretty convincing argument. I can really see all his premises. He didn't need to use uncertainty language because he was omnipotent, but or not omniscient. But I think we should, especially in finance, do this. Now, one thing she argues, I think is pretty good, is it opens the doors for others to challenge. If you come up on someone and say, "There's no way Trump's going to be the next nominee for Republican," and you say it in that way, people are going to like, "Hey, this person's going to fly off the handle." You know, if they challenge you. You instead say, you know, I think his chances of getting the nomination are really weak right now. What do you think? You know, you open it up because what do you want in finance? You want, maybe you're not going to talk about the election in finance, but you might. It could be important. I mean, the first election for Trump, everybody was saying consistently Trump wins and the stock market's going to crash, right? It was just universal. And sure enough, Trump wins and the stock market drops and then it shoots up. What if you say, hey, if Trump wins, this market's crashing? Or if you instead say, hey, if Trump wins, I think the stock market's going to react negatively to that. What do you think? You give yourself the ability to listen to somebody else's opinion. You don't shut them off, and you need that kind of counsel all the time. So she's saying, allow the person you're talking to, give them the ability to challenge you without it being some big fight and stepping on your toes. So open up the door for others to challenge their beliefs and bring up contradicting information. She says, lead with agreement. Try to make differences in opinions sound like we're adding information. So use the word and. So I agree with you and then disagree with them. Versus I agree with you, but they hear that but. I guess that's better than you're wrong, let me tell you the truth. But I agree with you and yeah, I agree with you, the stock market might fall if Trump wins. And I think there's a good chance though that we might be surprised. I don't know how you do that. It's going to be awkward language, but try your best. Just realize, she's talking about how to deal with our egos, but we also have to deal with the ego of the person we're talking to. We want their honest assessment. We want to do it in a way where we're going to get an honest assessment and be able to break down biases. So you want to set it up such that you get their honest assessment, but then you can challenge them. And without both of you getting overly defensive, it's really, really tough. So how do we handle people where, coming to us and something bad has happened? So you validate the past and then you try to change the focus of the future. So sorry that this happened. What's your strategy going forward? So it won't be so bad next time. That may not be the best way to say it. Ask for permission to tell the truth. Or sometimes people are just venting. You have to recognize that. They might, I remember a guy I worked with, he goes, yeah, I went home last night. My wife comes out and she says, she had this horrible day and she's telling me all this stuff. And I told her, honey, why didn't you just? And I go, wait a minute. the first words out of your mind were, honey, why didn't you just, is that what you want to hear after a horrible day? Let me tell you how you could have done it much better. It's like, no, that's not the first thing you say to someone who's had a horrible day. But anyway, so learn from experiences means using outcomes as data points. So this is huge. You can do this. I can't. I'm too old. But you can start letting your life be data points. So every time you do something, you start collecting the data and keeping track of it. That's kind of back to the Soros daily diary. What decisions did I make this today? Why did I make them? You're probably gonna get too tired and overworked to keep that going. But one thing I really wish I'd done when I was your age was keep a daily journal. Boy, I don't know if I'd want to read it today, but wow, I wish I knew, because you're going to forget 99.99997% of your life, except for those big change moments. But you know, keep a journal. And one thing you might keep track of the journal is after you write your journal, what happened today, keep track of all that. But at the bottom, you might say, what decisions did I make this today and why? And then, you know, find a way to go back and reassess it. It may be too painful. I don't know. I'm too old to try it, and I don't even care anymore because I don't have to get a career going. And so we got to get to the point where we got to understand if something happened because of luck or skill. Look for improvement after good outcomes. That's hard to do. So you had a good outcome, but could it have been better? And then show compassion after bad outcomes. Not only collect your own data, but collect data from other people. Look at what they did. Look what decisions they made. Why did they make them? So essentially she's saying, look at life as a sample. You're collecting sample size, and you're not going to learn if you don't collect the data in some organized, methodical way. Seek truth over everything else, and let this accomplishment feed your ego. This is what I was talking about earlier. How do you feed your ego? Try to feed your ego with learning something, changing your mind, make it your goal. My goal now in reading books is to actually see if I can get my mind changed. Can I think differently about this? And that you learn something others will miss due to their biases. So if you can somehow change your focus, a slight improvement in decision quality compounds over time. So it becomes quite material over time. All right, now this we did at USA very, very effectively. She calls it a decision pod, a group of people who are going to give you honest feedback. You don't want the boss that just thinks you're the most wonderful person in the world. You want the boss. Yeah, I don't know if you want the boss that's constantly cutting you down either, but you need an honest boss who's going to give you the assessment. My first 5 bosses, I was very, very fortunate. So my first boss was Susan. I'm still good friends with her. She was, well, I messed some stuff up early in my career, and she was like very patient with me, but she also was like, yeah, you got to get that right next time. You know, she was pretty honest. Chris was the second one. I didn't work as long with Chris. So I had five of my first 6 bosses were women. Very, very different personalities, each one of them. But probably Lane, of all of them, Lane was probably the one who was best at this. She was very honest in a way that she got you thinking how you should do things differently. So really powerful. So I was lucky. I had five really good bosses there. As I tell students, your first boss is probably more important than your first company. You can work for a great company and a bad boss and be worse off than working for a mediocre company with a great boss. Your first boss is really, really critical. I would recommend you actually change jobs if you have a bad first boss, because you just can't waste time in your early part of your career. You got to be challenged. So you need that kind of group. But she's actually saying do that yourself by finding friends, and not even friends, a group of people. You actually want to be people that you maybe don't know that well. The group does not follow social norms, but will intentionally create uncomfortable encounters. We need this because others can often spot our blind spots. Could y'all handle this? A group of people who are just going to be brutally honest with you. And your egos handle that. So what does a decision pod mean? I don't know what you call it a pod, but decision pod, you pursue exploratory, not confirmatory thought. So your goal with a pod is not to get them to agree with you. Your goal is to get them to question things you didn't think about. So you got to set it up. She'll show you how you set it up. Be open-minded. So your goal in going to the group is truth. What am I missing? What am I missing? I remember when I did the pension plan, I'm glad we did it. I thought it was a great decision, but boy, I was scared to death. You know, this is a $3 billion plan, which is pretty big back then, not so big today, but $3 billion plan. And no one else in the country is doing this. And I've got fiduciary requirements, which means if it messes up and I'm the only one doing it, that looks really, really bad. So I took it to my decision pod, and there's one guy in there that he didn't like it. He thought I was making a mistake, and I was like listening to him. What is he saying? I highly respected him, very smart guy. He didn't convince me, and I stuck with what I was doing, but he, you know, and I didn't sleep well during that time, but yeah, I wanted to hear other people's opinion. I know some people that they're scared to tell other people because they're worried that it's a really bad decision and they don't want to be embarrassed. It's like, you know what, if it's a really bad decision, I'd rather be embarrassed than lose the company $3 billion. That's just, and that's me personally. I don't know, you might not be in that camp, but it's like, make a fool out of me now, not later when it's other people's money. So seek truth, that's your goal. All are accountable to the group and to the accuracy. So the group is rewarded for accuracy. Seek diversity of the membership. So find people, different ages, all different backgrounds. So he uses Robert Merton's. This is not Merton we know, but this I think is his father. I think it's his father, Robert Merton's father. Y'all heard of Merton before, but he calls it kudos. Some of it sounds a little strange. So the first one he calls is communism, but not the communism we're thinking about. He should have said communal. So commitment to the group and ownership of information by the group. So no secrecy. Universalism, accept accuracy no matter the source. Don't shoot the message because your attitude toward the messenger. So it's like any information that helps you is acceptable. Disinterestedness, I can't say that, disinterestedness. Avoid biases that can influence the group's decision. So one thing you want to avoid is tell the group the decision you've made. So this is what I'm thinking about. Here's a few things I've been thinking of. That's a lot better than I'm about to present this to the committee. This is my recommendation. What do y'all think of my recommendation? Because then they're somewhat attacking you if they disagree. So if you can avoid telling them what your conclusions and recommendations are before you go talk to them, and you want skepticism, encourage engagement, dissent, you want argument. So yeah, we did this at USAA. I think I mentioned we called it the USA Asset Group or Investment Group. I can't remember what we call it. So I started before I moved to the investment company. Stuart was there. He's the guy who took his place. So what we're doing, what our strategies are, what we think the Fed's doing, what the economy is doing, what are we missing, what are our blind spots. Pretty intense group. We had a huge respect for each other. When you have huge respect for each other, you talk to each other like you hate each other. It's just the nature of it. It's kind of like brothers and sisters. I mean, we're just like, we're owning each other's cases constantly. Like one guy was always bullish, always optimistic. We're like, you're just full of it. There's no way the world's going to be that good. So it was very, very, very healthy. And I think that's the huge thing is when you're confident in your abilities, you don't mind people criticizing you. It's when you're insecure that you don't want to hear opinions. And so, you know, it kind of tells you something about yourself if you can't take this kind of harassment. So knowing you're going to have to explain your decision to the group is actually going to help you make better decisions. So just having that process there is good. Now, one thing we started doing at USAA is weekly writing our opinions down on where we thought markets were going. We published that on USA.com. And so this group would get together and debate. My job was the first draft, and then Cliff did the second draft, and he always butchered my draft. He didn't think I wrote very well, so it was kind of interesting relationship there. And then we published it. So our opinions were out there, and we weren't telling everybody at USA had to agree with us, but we did have to have a USA viewpoint. We couldn't have the sales floors say, hey, we think the economy is going to be really strong when our official is the economy is going to weak and we're cutting back on stocks. So we need to make sure. So we're not saying you don't have to agree with us, but you do have to, when you talk to members, say this is USA's current position on this. This is what we're recommending. So you need a pretty intense debate to have something like that going out, that you didn't miss something obvious. And it worked. It was very, very powerful. I still remember Dee Dee talking the summer of 2008. She was presenting her strategy, and Dee Dee's incredibly smart, PhD in math. She ran the largest bond fund at USA. She's retired now, but just saying, wow, if she's right, 2008 is going to be a disaster. We should just get out of everything. And she nailed it perfectly. It was just amazing. But she's very quiet, so we didn't hear from her very often. But when she's kind of like, when she spoke, you go, oh wow, okay, I hadn't thought of that before. Those are kind of people. She wasn't in our group. We should have put her in the group because she had these ideas that none of us was thinking. If you see a person like that, you maybe invite them into your group and say, wow, you just think strange. That's what we're looking for. You don't think like normal people. We need you in our group. You're going to be accountable to the group. So yeah, you're trying to get something that gets you to start thinking differently about making decisions, because as Hubbard says, it's the most important decision you make is how you're going to make decisions. Then time travel. I'm a big fan of time travel. I use it all the time. So how do you do time travel? It's pretty cool, right? When you love to do time travel. So how do you do time travel? So she says, we make better decisions today by placing ourselves in the future after the outcome of decision and thinking back to today. That your future self influence the decisions of your current self. We need to remember the future. She gives the Seinfeld example. Seinfeld, y'all don't know Jerry Seinfeld because he's kind of my generation. I keep thinking his show went off the air like 3 years ago, but I think it's like 25 years ago. I don't know. And y'all have never even seen it, right? Y'all weren't even born when Seinfeld was on TV. So, but Seinfeld has this one skit where he says, I hate nighttime Jerry, because he's out partying and he's thinking, I have to get up early tomorrow. So who cares? That's early morning Jerry. This is nighttime Jerry. And nighttime Jerry's having a blast. Why? Because it's not his problem. It's morning Jerry's problem. And she's saying, no, you need to have more compassion for your future self, not be quite so mean to your future self. And I've been doing that quite a bit. I used to be this, go to HEB at 10 o'clock and buy a bag of Oreos. I used to be that kind of person. Don't do that anymore. When that comes to my mind, I think in detail about opening a bag of Oreos. The first 3 are wonderful. The fourth one's kind of, the 19th and 20th ones are horrible. And I'm going to have acid reflux all night. The first 3 take, about 5 minutes to eat? So I'm going to drive to HEB for 30 minutes so I can enjoy 3 cookies and have acid reflux all night. And the next morning I'm going to be overweight. And no, I would go in detail thinking about how miserable those 7th, 8th, and 9th cookies were. It's like, why would I ever do that? And it's been so effective. I've not had that problem. I don't think I've had to run the HEB in a long. It's bad for HEB, but it's been great for me. And that's what she's saying is, we're real good at showing other people compassion, but she's saying, hey, show your future self some compassion. Most of us are pretty good at sacrificing today to show compassion to another person. She says, that's fine. Just add your future self to that list of people you show compassion to. And it's quite effective. We don't always, we tend, and this is part of I think the optimistic brain. I think we exaggerate the Oreos, don't we? That there's going to be something that's really, really wonderful thing, and they're really not. In our brain, for some reason, some people have that with buying a new car. They have this thing, oh, this new car is going to be wonderful. Everybody's going to love me, all this, and then you buy it and you have what? Cognitive dissonance, right? You're like, oh, why did I do that? I got these bills now. You have to somehow get yourself into that true future self and not the pretend one that your mind is making up. I think it's really powerful. I've used it quite effectively. So we discount the future too much in order to justify doing something now. We regret the bad decisions to a point before the decision is made. So try to move your regret up to now. So don't move the regret to after you can't do anything about it. That's too late. Really powerful stuff. You can see that in people's retirement plans. People are just not ready for retirement, Why? Because it's out in the future. They're not really worried about it. They'd rather party today. And, retirement accounts are woefully inadequate today. So time travel is help with pre-commitments. So ride sharing before someone goes out drinking, overeating at the mall by reducing how much out of time you have there. My one thing I haven't gotten over is airport eating. If my flight's delayed, calories no longer count, and I just can't get over that because I just hate sitting in airports, and eating is the only thing I can do. I'm not going to eat carrots, I can tell you that. So it's, that's tough to do. She says, bring healthy snacks with you on the trip. That's hard to do now because, it's hard to get things through security. Automatic investing, set up your credit cards for full payment every month, strict budgets. There's many things you can do. So it's quite important. It may be in this presentation, I can't remember, but yeah, I thought I had it in here. Oh, yeah, it is. It's coming. I'll get to it. It's kind of related to time travel, so I want to bring it in here. So how does this thinking best different from how we normally make decisions? So we think of the future as several possibilities and assign probabilities. Instead of thinking the future as this one deterministic. That's why I think firms should stop doing forecasts, these deterministic forecasts. We should be doing a range of forecasts to kind of think of the different possibilities. We use probabilities to determine expected values to equate high payoff, low probabilities with low payoff. So, just using, it's looking in distributions, looking at averages, expected values, worst case, best case scenarios. We value optionality in decisions. Neeson Taylor talks a lot about that. So optionality is extremely important. If you have a decision where you have the option where you can break and get out, that's the best kind of decisions, so that you actually have another decision that you can make. We value that greatly. We imagine the destination and walk back. So backcasting. So this is one I relate to time travel. Backcasting, incredibly powerful. So how does that work? So we can work back from both good and bad outcomes. It works a lot better with the bad outcomes. So with a good outcome. So what we're doing here is everything's worked out. We're now going to document what did we do that led to success. Bad outcome, we actually go back and say what got us off track. But even better, do it in advance. So I've started doing this. We used to call this postmortem. Y'all know postmortem? What does that mean? I should ask Alexei if they use this in medical school. So postmortem is, you had the operation and you left a sponge in the person's body. So now you got to figure out where that broke down. That's post. So what she's talking about here is pre-mortem. Have y'all heard of pre-mortem? So pre-mortem is you made the decision, but before you implement, you say, okay, let's pretend it's a year from now and it completely bombed. Let's walk through what happened. All right. So it's a disaster. It completely bombed. What went wrong? We start thinking about things that we weren't thinking about before, because now we're in the negative side. We're overly optimistic. So negative visualization is a lot better. So let's say someone, a good example, I keep bringing up weight because weight's such an issue in the United States. We have food everywhere. So let's say someone says, I'm going to lose 10 pounds this next year. Say, okay, that's great. It's a good goal to have. Let's pretend like it's a year from now and you gain 10 pounds. What happened? It's like, oh, gained 10 pounds. Well, the first 3 months I was doing great. And then my nephew had a birthday party at our house. We bought way too much food. Not enough people showed up. We kept all the food. I couldn't resist, so I gained it all back. It's like, okay, well, why don't you not buy too much food? Maybe you have someone that's going to run an HEB if you need more food. Why don't you email all the guests to bring ice chests and commit? You start planning in advance. So you say, okay, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. You think through those kind of things and you set it up in advance and you commit in advance. It's another really quite powerful tool. And she's talking about doing that in business. Our team's going to execute this let's talk about what went wrong. Let's just assume it went wrong and let's talk through it. It's actually quite powerful way of getting people thinking very, very differently. How else is thinking in beds different than how we normally do things? We see even good outcomes as just one possibility, not as inevitable. So we try to avoid the hindsight. You probably get add here. We ask what led to this success and if it was what we were expecting. So how much was it with luck versus skill? That's a painful thing. Did we get a good outcome because we're really smart or because we're really lucky? We want it to be because we're really, really smart. But let's be honest, because the next decision, if we're really lucky, the next decision may not work out quite so well. We want to make sure we know that. So life is a long game. You're dealt many, many hands. Although I will say, not to freak you out, your most important hands are happening in your next 3 years. Wouldn't you agree? Your career, whom you married, how many kids you're going to have, whom you marry. That's probably the single most important one. Is, you probably already are married. How many kids you have, that's pretty critical decision, right? Are you marrying someone who wants the same number of kids you want? Right? Yeah, I don't want any kids. Oh, I want 12. Oh, okay, well, let's get married anyway. We'll have 6. No, that's not going to work out very well. These are huge, huge, huge decisions. Your career decisions, don't ask me about the marriage decisions. I'm not any good at that, but your career decisions, you can definitely talk to me about those. A few things I'll tell you, first of all, is your first job is pretty important, but it's not disaster if it's not perfect, but you better get out fast. So you've got about 3 to 5 years where you've got to make some pretty quick decisions. You really got to make some decisions about what you're going to specialize in. I was incredibly lucky. I had, talk about luck versus skill. I was just lucky. I was just in the right place at the right time. Balance sheet immunization was just perfect for me. Actuaries were perfect for me. I'm a little bit odd. I'm kind of Asperger's type, person, and actuaries are wonderful for that. Not that all actuaries are like that, but life actuaries, actuaries who talk about nothing. Sorry, Lisa, but you probably met some actuaries like what I'm talking about. Life actuaries, they talk about death and dying all day long. They tend to be fairly, on that spectrum kind of people. They can handle that. That was perfect people for me. I don't like engineers. For Valero probably wouldn't be good. I've been intimidated and scared, but actuaries, like, they just brutally honest, which I love. If I said something stupid, guess what they would say? Wow, Ron, that was really stupid. And I love that. That's what I need. I need to know exactly what people are thinking. So it's just perfect for me. But you're going to have to figure that out. So hopefully you'll have the luck I had. But if you don't, you're going to have to make changes, be willing to jump. And one thing I definitely can tell you is, if the only reason you don't make a change is fear, then make the change. All right. Fear is your biggest hurdle. So I know people say, I don't want to leave San Antonio. Well, then leave San Antonio. If the reason you're not taking a job is you don't think you can do it, so what should you do? You take that job, right? The scariest thing you can stomach, you got to do it, because that's going to radically change your life. So that's going to give you an advantage. But you get many hands, but just to warn you, you're about to get the most important hands in your life for the next 3 to 5 years, and you got to make some decisions. It's going to radically change where you are. At my age, decisions aren't nearly as important, because I'm kind of set, but you're at the point where this is really important. We can have failures, but we got to use those failures. We have to accept failures are going to happen. We've got to try to make it so that they're less likely, or that we learn from them. The goal is to improve statistics. It's not to get perfect, and to learn. What did Hubbard say? That guy said, experience is inevitable, learning is not. Wasn't that a great quote? You should put that, you have to give that to your replacement. That would have been a good quote. So yeah, you've got to learn from every experience that you had. This requires brutal honesty, which I don't think we're really good at. Being engaged minds, that's why smartphone zombies, I know smartphone zombies, their argument is, I'm learning to multitask. But what the scientists have discovered is, your brain isn't adding multitasking to its skills. It's eliminating another skill and adding multitasking. So what is it eliminating? engagement, deep thought, concentration, and it's substituting it with being able to do. And the human mind today is amazing. I've read some of these books. There's some simple stuff we do today that people 300 years ago could not possibly have handled. It's pretty amazing. But there's things that I don't know if you read some of the letters people wrote 300 years ago and what kids were studying in second grade. It's amazing how deep they could get into a subject that we just can't. So the multitasking, yeah, it's great, but boy, we're killing brain cells to do it because the brain can't be great at everything. So brutal honesty, engaged mind, unbiased advisors. You want people that are truth tellers around you if you can find those. So I was very lucky with that, with the actuaries, with the investment group at USAA, very, very powerful. So I was lucky. I hope all of y'all will be lucky. Y'all are all smart people, so that helps. But you've got to be willing when you're in the wrong situation to get out and move and make a change quickly. So be willing to change rapidly and just go for it. I think she has a lot to say. I don't recommend her second book. What she tried to do in the second book was the exact same thing again, but to give you workbooks and ways to work through it. And I don't think maybe it's because I'm on my bike. I couldn't do the little exercises she had, but I do highly recommend this book. I don't know if any of y'all read it yet, but it's exactly what you need to do. Improve the quality of your decisions. Become better statistically is really what she's saying. That's what she's saying, thinking in bets. All right, any questions on Duke? She's a good public speaker as well. So if you go to some of her YouTubes and podcasts, she's really, really good. She's pretty consistently on this topic. So I haven't seen her get off onto other topics. But so I think I heard someone, but all right. Real quick on Hubbard, I know we covered him last time, but so if you're rolling 100 dice or flipping 1,000 coins, the normal distribution is your best bet. So he's saying the same thing Neeson was saying. But financial markets, supply chains, IT projects, they tend not to follow that type of distribution. Just a second. I'm setting up my lawsuit against Zoom, so this is important. Very similar to what Neeson says. A lot of the world does work really well with normal distributions and standard deviations on all that. Other things don't. Financial markets, supply chains, we're learning that this year, or the last few years. Supply chains, man, when they break down terribly. Major IT projects, these are complex systems. Friedman has a really great talk. He talks about a pencil. Pencil seems pretty simple. Have you ever heard that talk? You really just go out, do Milton Friedman and the pencil. But listen to that talk. Seems pretty simple. And then he goes through what does it take? Have any of y'all seen this? Nobody? It's really, really good. I don't know if I could find it or not. How do you spell Friedman? Friedman. Nietzsche. I've read Nietzsche as well. Friedman, Milton. Pencil video. There it is right there. So 2 minutes and 26 seconds. We should listen to it now. But the point he's making is the pencil seems so simple, but when you actually look at all of its components, it's a quite complex, it's quite amazing. Now he's talking about capitalism and how amazing capitalism is. It's quite amazing. These millions of pencils are made because it takes a whole bunch of different people who have no idea what the other person is doing, all somehow coming together. And the final producer of it could not possibly produce anything else in there, just putting it together. The rubber people don't know anything about the wood people. The flint people don't know anything, and there's a little piece of metal right there. It's pretty amazing. You watch it. He's a great public speaker as well. So, so these are complex systems. Some of us from Costa Rica, y'all saw the banana tour, right? And isn't it pretty amazing? Those people are doing stuff. We're going to be eating those bananas a few weeks later. And we think big deal, you just pick a banana from a tree. That's not quite from a plant. It's not quite that easy, is it? I mean, you look at everything. Why are you having them floating in the water like that? Why do you bag them like that? And they had us bag something, not this group. I don't know if y'all tried bagging them. I wasn't very good at it. They're like, no, that wasn't right. And it's like, well, you know, it's complex systems and they're doing something they've never done before. So they're learning a whole new system. I've seen that with the sugarcane and the coffee beans. The processes are amazing. Yeah, Alex, he walked us through the coffee beans, the African beds that they have, and the process that they have of putting them in the bags and storing them, and then they got to sell them. And these are complex systems. And we walk over to HEB and we say, oh, this banana is a little brown. I don't want this one. It's like, you know, that banana is. Some farmers spent the entire day working on that. It got shipped here, got trucked over to HEB. They had to put it in there, and there's one little brown spot. You're not going to eat it. Like, give me a break. It's a perfectly good banana. There's nothing wrong with it. So these are complex systems. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. So what can go wrong? He says these systems are subject to what he calls contagion. So a system can be stressed in a way. A lot of stresses, you know, they get fixed and we don't really notice it. There are some stresses that can cause a failure of the entire system. The failure of one component causes the failure of other components. He calls that the common mold failure. The failure of those components in a system start a chain reaction, cascade failure. That's what we're worried right now with the bank prices. We say, is it going to mushroom into JP Morgan and all these others or not? And the answer is, we don't know. That's a scary answer when you're talking about $3 trillion banks. We just don't know. Although I'm a booster for the firms that develop powerful tools like Crystal Ball, the most popular products. Do y'all use Crystal Ball? What does UTSA have? Crystal Ball or at risk? What do y'all use? Do y'all use either one of the, what did y'all use in your modeling class to do simulations? Y'all remember? Is it another model? Who's taking modeling? You have a stat, you have to do a stochastic class, Lisa? No, it's option. Okay. Do you know what software they would use? Yeah, y'all should probably check these out. I don't know what comes up if I type Crystal Ball, but Oracle. So Oracle owns Crystal Ball. I don't remember who owns At Risk. I think they have a student version that's pretty cheap, or you might try the UTSA library. Those are the two. Well, actually, at USA we had a third party build this one, but they did use At Risk. Crystal Ball, At Risk there's another one owned by, I don't know who. Oh, by PALIS. I forget the name of that firm. They probably have a student version, or they may not be that expensive. I think this is software that's a lot like Excel and Word, where you might be $100, $200 a year. I don't think it's ridiculously expensive, and it allows you to build some really, really sophisticated simulation models and tools. They're pretty easy to use. You could actually, for paper 2, you could actually stick all of my assumptions in that you're doing for the asset classes, and you could actually run 1,000 simulations and get 1,000 returns on your portfolio. You could do that with these models. It's not that difficult to do. It's a pretty powerful stuff. So he likes that. The most popular products to have one major omission of all the wide assortment of distribution types. They don't include the power law distribution. What's the key with the power law distribution? It kicks into a gear that we don't see coming. Because what happens is when you're in this cascade failure, the losses don't go up 5-fold or 10-fold. They go up 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold, 1,000,000-fold. I mean, it's something that it's kind of ESCOT right in 2020 or 2021. Everything fell apart at the same time. And boy, it was horrible to believe, here we are in the United States and we don't have electricity for a week. It's the power law distribution. Earthquakes follow the power law. They're almost impossible to predict because they're uncommon. But when they happen, there's no statistics that gives us any help because the entire system falls apart. So how do you build a power law distribution? He probably gives you some ideas. I think he talked about this some in his presentation as well. Extremely skewed distributions. And then what we we've seen his everybody everywhere comments. This comes out of his the failure risk management. Is focusing on the least valuable measures at the expense of the most valuable measurements. Everybody everywhere is systematically measuring all the wrong things. He mentioned that in his presentation. It is so pervasive and impactful that I have to wonder how much of this affects GDP. Organizations appear to measure what they know how to measure without wondering whether they should learn new measurement methods for very high value uncertainties. Some of it's pretty unpredictable. So COVID in 2020, I don't want to be HEB supply chain management person in March of 2020, but they had to deal with it, right? I'm hoping the guy from United, if he does come Thursday night, we'll talk about 2020. What happens when your volumes drop 80% in 1 year? Now, and United is something that they had never done before. They started freely reimbursing people for tickets. Did you try that in 2019? Oh, I don't want to do this trip anymore. I can get my money back. Oh no, you can use it in a future trip and we'll charge you $100 to change. And then suddenly they say, hey, here's your money back. No big deal. Huge impact on that. How do you survive? How does United survive when you have 80%? You got all these big planes, you got all these unions, you got to pay, flight attendants, you got to pay, and suddenly 80% drop. That's off the charts. How do you manage that kind of thing? This is one of my favorite quotes from Martin Leibowitz. The great investors are like great sailors that have a course to set forth. I talked about courage before. They know where they want to go. They have a strong gyroscope to keep them on course. They have appropriate respect for the dangers of the sea. I think a lot of us in investments don't really appreciate how dangerous markets are and its potential for radical shifts and weathering currents. And they are not afraid to be alone for long stretches. Be unconventional. Our profession doesn't really allow us to do that because of the expert, the fiduciary rule, encourages everybody to do the exact same thing all the time because you don't get sued when you do that. But it's a great quote back from 17 years ago before the 2008 crisis. So really good stuff in here. Think a lot about how you're going to handle this. A lot of it has to do with your personality that you don't know yet. So you got to figure it out. You got to figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are. I've heard people say, figure out your weaknesses so you can fix them. I don't agree with that approach. To me, is figure out your weaknesses so you can avoid them and then just go deep on the strengths. That's what I did. That may not be your approach, but that's my approach, is just figure out what you're really good at. You have to think in terms of a personal brand. What are you all about? Who you are personally, and be ready to learn and to build. I remember one student in this class years ago. She came to me in tears, and she sent out an email telling people she needed some numbers, and she was a newbie. And one of the ladies she sent it to just took it the wrong way. He says, "You newbie, you're not gonna tell me how to do my job." And she sent back the worst email, cuss words, completely inappropriate. So the student, she's in tears, and she's like, "This is horrible. I can't believe this." And I thought, this is like the best thing that's ever happened to you. Here's this newbie that no one even knew existed. And guess what's just happened? This email went out to her, copying everybody. Guess what everybody's thinking? How is she going to react? Isn't that what you want in your job? How is this person going to react? And I was telling her, take advantage of it. Everybody's looking to see what kind of person you are. If I were you, I'd go to my boss and say, it looks like I'm messed up. I don't know how to respond to this. Can you give me some insights? Your boss would love that. What's the worst thing she could do? Reply to all, right? That's what we want to do. So, you got to figure out who you are, and then you got to take a deep breath, think through it, learn. Don't act too fast. That's why you have a great boss. I do recommend strongly you sit down with your boss and say, hey, this is like, I don't understand this. I need some help. The ego is going to be your killer and your personal brand. My personal brand was give it to Ron, he'll do it because he'll do anything. That was my brand. I don't know why that was my brand. I was doing stuff that had nothing to do with my job. It was stupid, but it got me to where I was at the end. So that finally helped me out. Is that your brand? Is that what you're going to do? That was just mine. My downside was I just did stuff and I never asked for a raise or promotions. So I had these huge responsibilities without the money. So they should have paid me more. But at the very end, they finally did. I didn't realize how underpaid I was until they made me an officer, and then I go, oh wow, they get paid a whole lot more than I had no idea. It's completely. My boss was apologizing because my bonus wasn't going to be extremely massive. It was just going to be really massive. And I'm thinking, wait, you're going to pay me how much? And he's apologizing. I'm thinking, yeah, I could buy a few houses, but that's kind of nice. Okay. I didn't say, wow, I can't believe you're not paying me more. So I was grossly underpaid, but that was kind of my brand. You got to think about that personal brand. And yeah, that was mine. Just bring it to me. I'll figure it out. The advantage to me for that brand, and I don't know why I had that brand, I never picked it. The advantage was I learned the entire company inside and out because I was doing all these projects. And then 15 years later, they had no choice to promote me because I knew the company better than anybody else because I've been doing all these stupid projects that were putting me there long hours. You may not be the long hour person that's going to learn the company like that, but you got to figure out what you can't do is your pretend personal brand. You can't have a personal brand that's not you. So you're gonna have, you probably, I would guess you don't know. And you don't know exactly what you're made of yet. Aren't you about to find out, or do you already know? Some of y'all might. I didn't. I was completely clueless when I went. I had no clue about anything. So I had to figure it out as I go. And I thought, okay, I'm really good at figuring out stuff. I'm not as smart as actuaries, but they're not going to work on the stuff that I'm getting. So I'll go to them and learn from them. We have some PhDs in math. I'll go to them, learn from them. So I had this, which probably is not a bad for all of y'all to adopt. I had this thing with, I'm not as smart as these other people, so I'm going to go learn from them. That would be pretty good for all of y'all to do, wouldn't it? So fortunately, I had that as part of my personality. It was just this incredible fear I had that, oh, I'm going to mess up in this job. So that just drove me to other people that knew what they were doing. And I do recommend that. You get in that first job, it's pretty easy. You're in a committee meeting. They ask a complicated question. The entire room turns and looks at Vicky. What are you going to do? She's going to become your best friend. You want to know everything that she knows. You're going to invite her to lunch. You're going to go to breaks. That's what you got. You got to find out who that person is that knows everything, and everybody looks to them for everything. If you find that, and that's what I did. So it became part of my personality is, hey, I'll figure it out. I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out. It was it wasn't courage. It was actually fear. I was fear that this is my job. I better do it. They asked me to do it. I better, I didn't even know I could turn stuff down. It was like, here it comes. There was one time USA had a chief economist, and he gave the economic outlook for USA twice a year, and then he quit because he didn't have enough to do. And so they go, well, Ron, you can do it. I go, well, I have like 18 hours of economics, but okay, why not? Sure. So I prepared a presentation, and the CFO gave the presentation, but it was a lot of work for me because I had to give him speaker notes. So I go, hey, Joe, why don't I just do the presentation? He goes, sure, that's fine. So, here I'm an analyst and I'm presenting at a planning conference. Everybody else is a senior vice president, but you just, what's the worst they can do to you? They can't torture you. They can fire you. That's not horrible. They can't torture you. So that was my attitude. Hey, you know what? I'll give it a try. And really what would happen is if I couldn't figure it out, a couple of days later, I go and say, I couldn't figure this out. I need someone to help me. And then they don't fire you even then. So, but figure these things out. I'm curious. Some of y'all are going to really figure it out pretty fast. Some of y'all may take a little more time. But where I want to go from here is apply some of the stuff that we've done. So there are a few cases that I've been using for some years because they're really perfect. I haven't added a 2008 case. I need to add a 2008 case. I don't think I can really do a pandemic case because it doesn't really lend itself to what we're talking about here. But I do want to cover these, and they all have documents out there that you can read through in advance. But I'll be covering most of it in class. I'll let you know in advance with the weekly email. And I'll finish up with this probably next Tuesday, unless we don't have a speaker on Thursday. If we don't have our speaker on Thursday, I'll get into the cases and I'll give you my most important risk management tricks. All right, any questions or anything? All right, so Michael Sassy from United Airlines. We had a contact there. United obviously is very good at hiring people because they hired Matthew, which is one of our star alums. I don't know if Mike knows Matthew, but a really sharp guy. So we saw one of United's competitors in the news earlier this year for saying pretty dramatic scheduling issues, including yesterday is the news again. Dr. Misner, who used to teach here, he used to complain about finding students that we have this view of businesses, everything just works magically. Revenues show up, employees show up, everything works, no errors. His idea is every major business, there's some crisis going on somewhere. This is the airlines industry. I can't even imagine the complexity of the scheduling of employees, of planes, fuel, of maintenance, planes breaking down. I had my last trip. Last summer, there was always complaints about late flights. My flight was all early. One flight, they had to replace the plane, and I was still on like 15 minutes late. So it's an amazing system. Mike, I still don't know how my luggage shows up on the right place. I see that, I've seen that mountain of luggage, and your plane leaves in 30 minutes, and then you get to your ride, and your luggage is pretty amazing. Sometimes it doesn't work. But then early this year, we saw Airline have major snafu. Very similar to what we saw with Doug Hubbard is contagion, things build together and everything falls apart all the time. So I want Mike to give us a sense of the complexity of this industry, what can go wrong, and then maybe we can get into detail. I don't know if we want to talk about your competitor, but we can talk specifically about how things like that can happen, if they're avoidable, how obvious were they that they could happen. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike. Give us some sense of the complexity of your job.
Sure thing. So first off, thanks for having me. This is one of the first times I've ever had an opportunity to talk to a college class. So this will be a good experience for all of us. A little bit about myself first. I know I didn't have a chance to get over my bio. This has kind of been a couple months in the making, and the last couple of months have been somewhat hectic. So I've been at United for 15 years. Just past that 15-year mark here this last December. Prior to that, I served in the Marines for 9 years. And so I've been in aviation in one way, shape, or form, even during college. So I went to Embry-Riddle, the intent of being a pilot, got there, realized I really didn't want to be a pilot. And so just stayed in the industry because I really liked being around airplanes and working on them. So I was in naval aviation for that 9-year period, and then joined the United family. And so in my time, I've spent it primarily around ops or staffing, resource planning, both on the ground side, in the catering space. I was able to lead the global ops staffing for both the in-source United kitchens as well as the global airports. So I had responsibility for staffing the airline on the ground for a few years. Was the chief financial guy for our O'Hare hub for a while. And then now in my current role, I am responsible for global crew staffing. That includes the plan, the long-term plan, the budget, all the labor related items. So such as collective bargaining or contract, work rules, all the way down to the day-to-day operations, which is where the majority of the risk is incurred. And so a day like today, you hit a ground delay program, it shuts the airport down, and then the complexity that's being referred to is what we deal with. And so the aspect of risk, I think, is really inherent at the beginning. And so I would say that when you take 25,000 flight attendants, which is what I have charge of now, and your intent is to be able to fly them around the world, you have to live by the work rules and the duty restrictions that you have for a given day. So I like to break down these examples to what we typically would experience in a normal work life. And that is for an individual flight attendant, where we're used to working, say, an 8-hour day, and a 40-hour work week. That's not how a flight attendant's work schedule is. They will start their day in one city. They could potentially end it in another, lay over for a period of time, and then continue on for a number of days. And then they have to meet all sorts of contractual rest requirements. And so our flight attendants contractually, so what we've bargained with the Association of Flight Attendants, the AFA, is that if you're flying a day flight, they can fly 13 hours of duty time before the schedule starts. So something that they bid. But once the day begins, so once they check in for that day, they can go as high as 15 hours. That's where you have some of the operational slide requirements. The FAA, those rules are a little bit less, so a little more conservative than what the FAA is saying. The FAA is saying you can fly 14 hours in the scheduled environment and up to 20 in an operational day. So the first portion of complexity starts with how long you're able to even work somebody. And so those days are also restricted in anywhere from 3 to 6 day patterns, as long as on the domestic side, you give them 10 hours worth of rest in between that 13-hour to 15-hour duty day. So in a day in which they start their work day on check-in and they start to experience cancellations, dependent upon where their cancellation or their disruption is really dependent on how you can fly that schedule. So to break it down in the most simplistic format, I'm a flight attendant and I start my day at 7 o'clock in the morning in Chicago with the intent to fly to San Francisco, connect in San Francisco, fly to San Diego, rest on layover, start my day 10 hours later and fly to Newark, turn it and fly to Chicago. That's a typical 3 to 4 day cycle. If something is broken from Chicago to all the way back to Chicago and that flight attendant is stranded, we need to fill the gap wherever that disrupted flight is along the way. And so now multiply that times 2,500 daily mainline departures that we have. So you could see the average crew size disrupted of say 4 times the number of flights disrupted can cause all sorts of constraints. So the question is, how do you handle and how do you mitigate that risk? You have a workforce that's split into 2 groups. One is your standard line holder, meaning they have a line that I just described that's 80 hours in a month, and that's how many hours they're going to fly. And when they start their day and their pairings in that individual sequence of events, they have total control of their schedule. That's the easy part. The hard part is the reserve. That's the other portion of the population. Where you manage reserves and where you house them is really dependent upon where you have a domicile and where the disruption is. So if you have disruption in a hub, it's a little bit easier to mitigate because I have a pool of flight attendants that are based in those hubs. But if I have a disruption in, say, Wichita, and that flight attendant's flight went on a long delay, and now they are illegal to fly because they need to go to rest, how do you solve for that? And that's where you either cancel the flight completely so that that crew can get rest. You delay it long enough, and if you have another flight coming in later in the day, you can deadhead flight attendants into position to get the crew there to start the flight all over again. So that's the most basic fashion of how a flight attendant or a crew schedule is going to be constructed. And the complexities are really built down into the 3 areas: duty time, rest, split between a line holder and a reserve, with certain mitigation tactics to handle them. So I'll pause there if there's any questions on anything before I go any further. If I've thoroughly confused anybody, please tell me.
You're probably going to hit this, but you have your normal allergies. People get sick. I know with COVID, you had a lot of that. Is that handled by the reserves, or do you overstaff flights, and then if someone's sick, they just are not there?
So we do not overstaff. Overstaffing can be extremely expensive. So depending upon where those sick outages happen, is typically covered by a reserve. Now, the downline sick is the bigger issue. And so some of the things that we do to mitigate downline sick, and what I mean by that is a place where we don't have a flight attendant domicile to be able to pull reserves from. You could do a couple of things. One, I could draft off another flight. So like, let's use, what's a bigger station that doesn't have a flight attendant domicile? San Diego. San Diego's got a pretty thick flight schedule. We don't have reserves in San Diego, but we have enough flying that goes in there. So I could have a crew that's currently on rest waiting to start their day 3 hours later, and I could draft them into it. So I can pull them off a later flight, move them in, and then position another crew into that location through deadheading or through just continue moving up those crews. But sick during COVID was an interesting piece because first off, we didn't have a very big flight schedule. So consumer demand was down like 97% or something. And the people calling in sick was mitigated because we just didn't really have any flying. Really the place where it got extremely problematic for us is when our flight schedule hit about 25% of recovery, because our sick rates were something like 30, 40%. So we needed to think about how we flew our schedule a little bit differently. Some of it was overstaffing, some of it was pre-positioning crews. And so you would deadhead additional flight attendants in locations where we were seeing the majority of that sick happen downline. And you can kind of follow that trend. So flight attendants, a very nomadic population. A lot of them commute. And so, you can look at trends and say, why do we have a lot of people calling in sick downline in a place like Seattle? Well, a lot of people commute from Seattle. And so if they were starting their day somewhere else and the trip they were expecting to pick up in Seattle to fly out was dropped because of sick, what we started doing was pre-positioning more crews there so that you overstaffed longer for the day rather than overstaffing every single flight. It's just a way to cover it. But in the hub, we started to look at reserve rates. And so a place like Denver, where we saw a pretty significant spike, and we still do experience that today. It's a extremely growing location. So I think we've more than doubled that size of Denver over the last couple of years. And our sick rate is doubled as well. It was 5%. Now it's in the 10, 11%. And we adjusted those reserve rates so that we carry more daily reserves there to handle the amount of sick that was in flux. That's one mitigation strategy. The other is premium pay. So we call it white and purple flag. It's basically overtime. The way the system works on the ground is you could just say, hey, I'll extend your shift 4 hours. In the flight attendant world, you would just put a flag on it to say, this is premium pay, and anybody can pick it up that's not working. And that's a huge mitigation strategy.
I'm just curious, I don't know this industry well enough. Ignoring just normal sick leave, how rare is a perfect day? No flights canceled, no flight attendants stranded. Is that impossible? Is it happening occasionally?
Yeah, I would say that would be finding a unicorn covered in gold at the end of a rainbow. Yeah, 100% rare. Like I've been doing this job 4 years. I've been in the industry 15. I've never seen a perfect day where we didn't have anybody stranded somewhere where we had to do something, some way, shape, or form. Human behavior will take care of that. I would say the station that is close to that on a day-to-day basis and we chuckle about often is Los Angeles. Don't get a lot of weather there. You don't have bad visibility issues. You also don't have a very big schedule and 150 departures. Not a lot of connections. So, where I spend the majority of my time and what's most stressful for me are mid-continent hubs with lots of connectivity. And Scott Kirby, our CEO, is big in the news of always talking about creating a manufacturing process to produce revenue through connections, because connections pull in catchment markets in cities across the country. And if you can produce service out of these main hubs and you can push out LCCs or ULCCs because they can't compete there with the prices and the product, then you can capture market share. And to do that, you need to generate a lot more connections at catchment markets. And whereas, people that are serving place like Denver, right, Southwest and SkyWest and these smaller carriers that are trying to pull in that revenue, we're just going to connect them through with those catchment markers where they would drive. They would drive the hour and a half into Denver. Well, we're flying now from places in which we didn't fly the frequency because we can pull them in and connect them out of Denver. So Houston, Chicago, and Denver, big mid-con hubs that have thousands of connections a day. And I would say Denver has something like 700 connecting flight attendants a day, or 600 connecting flight attendants a day. So when you have a microburst happening in Denver and you have diversions, you need to mitigate through various forms. And a lot of it becomes sometimes cancellations, which creates consolidation opportunities, and then you can push the flight out.
All right, thanks. That helps. Good question. One question from Lance here.
I want to talk about unruly customers. And I heard that on the news that they're cracking down on them and banning them and stuff. Is there anything that your company specifically does that like addresses this or something?
So I missed the first part of the question. So did I hear something about customers? I didn't hear the full question.
Unruly customers.
Oh, unruly customers. So yes, like that is something that I have exposure to. It's not something that I'm overly responsible for. So my counterpart in the in-flight division owns all of the bases, but they do get training, and they do have certain measures to be able to handle those customers. The number one thing they do when the customer gets to a place where it's completely unruly is they'll divert the flight, land it, and pull the passenger off. I've seen that happen a lot more in the last, definitely post-COVID, than it happened before. People are just very unruly in regards to safety and personal space and things of that nature. So the number one course strategy when a passenger gets to a place where the flight attendant feels it's no longer safe, they'll land the plane.
Yeah, rerouting, that must be a disaster for you. Oh, word.
Any sort of diversion is a disaster, especially when it's macro. Like one flight is fine. When you have 25, then that is something that we now need to face. That's a totally different challenge than we've had in the past. So thinking about when we were at our peak in mid 2019, pre-COVID, we had something like 5,000 departures a day. Well, almost 3,000 of those were express. We were in a low 2,000 number of mainline. But United is a well-publicized growth strategy. United Next, we've even branded it. We're going to grow our airline to the size of Air Canada, Lufthansa, and United all combined by 2026. So you're flying, something like 40, 50 million or billion ASMs. It's going to be, 90. So it's almost doubling the size of the entire airline. And but how do you do that? So there's a pilot shortage. It's a huge problem across the entire industry. And so smaller jets aren't the way to be able to grow. And you can't grow all of your gates. You just can't manifest gates magically, right? There's all sorts of red tape and real estate, and it's extremely expensive. And so the best way to do that is if you're going to send your same, say, 4 flights from Chicago to Orlando, in the 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. channel of the day. In the past, you had 2 737-800s and 2 50-seat regionals. Now you have 4 737-900s. So you've now doubled your size of your capacity, but you didn't add more flights. But those 2 regional jets used to be regional jets. Now they're mainline. So you just need more pilots. And so the bigger problem, though, is when you start having irregular operations and things are diverting. Instead of having smaller planes with less customers and passengers that aren't going to be as affected, now you have all of them mainline. And so that's the biggest constraint that we're dealing with these days, which is a little bit different than a place like Southwest and what they've experienced recently. They fly the same fleet. So they've been flying 737s for 100 years, 50 years, or however old that company is. But we're changing our mix. And so now that 4,000 to 5,000 flights that used to be, 60% express are now 70% mainline, which creates just a completely different problem that we've been working towards for the last year and a half since we've announced this growth strategy. Is that a helpful answer for that question?
I don't know where you're planning on going next, but looking at, I want to spend quite a bit of time on the tail risk, the extremes, because this is a risk management class. We've been studying Doug Hubbard, who talks about the contagion risk, those extreme events that seem impossible, but then when you see how everything's interconnected and, you have one thing fail and the domino effects. So I don't know if you want to specifically talk about Southwest, but
Sure.
what is the disaster scenario here that just either you can't possibly see coming or you could have seen coming, but it's so rare you decide to let it go?
Well, no one ever saw COVID coming into that level. So I will say that in my career, that was probably the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with. Look, I think you even said this at the beginning, we are very much a technology company. All companies are very much technology companies these days. So in the division that I'm responsible for, I have 16 different systems that we work with each and every day for various reasons. Some of them are macro crew planning, some of them are day-to-day operations. And so when you have system outages, that's the boogeyman, so to speak, what we worry about the most. We have had a really big level of investment in time, energy, and just headspace in working through our systems over the last 5 to 7 years, especially post-merger, where we have a lot of fail-safes in place. Yeah, we have legacy systems, but we have capacity, we have multiple data centers, we have redundancy within our systems. So, for example, we don't train our scheduling workforce only on the graphic user interfaces that's easy to work with. We teach them on the ground level mainframe, so the blue screen. So they're trained how to work at the most granular and most basic level of the system. So, and in some cases, that's understanding the coding. It's very, very different than what people would typically used to see. When I first came into United 15 years ago, I was trained on how to use legacy-based systems, and it wasn't even the main function of my job, but I had to learn it because I had to work with it. And so over the years, we have united it, especially when it comes to front-facing and ground operations. We have been very diligent in ensuring that we can work the system that we're responsible for at the most basic level, because the legacy system isn't really the problem. As crazy as that may sound, it's the most basic and isn't taking up the most bandwidth. It's the stuff that you layer on top that we have found fails more often. And so if you can go behind the screen and work the problem that way, then you can work through outages. And so our main system is called Cosmos. It is a mainframe blue screen legacy system that requires tons of typing and a mouse is obsolete. Over the top of that is something called UCrew. And UCrew is your typical point and click, move your pucks around system. That's the system that has the most problems with us. So I would say that system has had a few outages. They don't happen often, but they have glitches. They're slow at times, depending on what's going on. And we can easily flip to the background and still get our job done just as fast. So that's been a fail-safe for us in place since the beginning to ensure that we don't have people that can't go in behind the scenes and work the system in the event of an outage. And we've never had a UCrew outage that's lasted more than 1 hour. So that's one way to mitigate risk. That's on the technology side. Operational risk is a completely different thing. So if Cosmos or our mainframe system completely goes dark, well, yes, I mean, the entire company would go on a ground stop. There's no doubt about it. And so, but it is the way to mitigate any sort of macro outage. And so if you did any reading about January 10th, we had a NOTAMs outage. And that was the FAA system to be able to communicate with pilots. And so it completely shut down the airline industry, the whole thing. It was a nationwide ground stop, which I think was the first one since September 11th. And we learned a lot that day. And what we found out immediately was our communication practices need to be very cohesive. So our National Operations Center is the kind of the brain of our operations on a day-to-day basis. And the first thing that group needed to do was align the crew-based responsibilities in pilots and flight attendants, because you need 3 groups to really fly at the end of the day. You need an airplane, you need flight attendants, and you need pilots. And so when you ground the entire industry all at one time, you have planes and crews that are starting to run the clock up against duty time and go illegal for FAA required rest. And you can't communicate with them to get them moving until the ground stop is lifted. And the first thing we needed to get an understanding of is how drastic is this going to be? Well, it ended up being a 3-hour ground stop. So we were already 3 hours behind at the beginning of the day. But what we did is we looked at 10 hours out from the time that happened, and we started working backwards and putting the airplanes with the crews. So once the ground stop got lifted, we can start operating, and we started canceling. And our overall communication plan led to us being able to identify the exact trips in the exact locations that had the most risk to cancellations and disruptions of passengers. We canceled them, consolidated them, and got the airline running. And so communication was the #1 key to mitigating the entire industry going on a ground stop and being able to get the transportation network running again with minimal disruption. I think, yeah, we took a bunch of delays, I mean, obviously, but in that day alone, I think we canceled 40 flights the entire day. We didn't cancel a single flight after 9 o'clock. American Airlines canceled 300.
Right. I can't even visualize that. So you're down for 3 hours. You don't know how long you're going to be down. I'm sure you're just panicking. Everybody's just scrambling. But is the system going to tell you which flights to cancel? That just seems
no. It's not. That's yeah. Yeah, that was the best part. So we had to have the individual groups all come together and sit in a war room and say, all right, in O'Hare, this is where our problems are. In Newark, this is where our problems are. And the National Operations Center, the in-flight flight attendant crew teams, and the pilot teams all had to sit in a room together. And we had systems up, yes, but there was no one system to say cancel all these flights.
Okay.
The 3 groups had to come together and say by location. So we used that 3 hours to our best of our ability as things started sliding, which is why we took a 10-hour out approach and worked backwards from there. We knew it wasn't going to be forever, but we knew it wasn't going to be short. So we said, all right, let's start 10 hours out and see where our duty times start to become a problem for our pilots to run up against legalities. And we were able to work through it. It was a very successful mitigation strategy to be able to tie all of the crews together and get the airline back up running.
Wow, that's just and is it definitive? It's like this flight's canceled, or we think this flight might be canceled. We'll decide in a couple of hours. I mean, was it like here's an hour and you had your plan and this is the rest of the day, or was it a complete hour?
It was a 3-hour plan. The first hour we knew that these flights right here were going to have to cancel because they're already going to go illegal by the time you get the flights start running again, because those flights can't come back. So it is a product of our flight schedule too. So 70% of United's flight schedule is out and back, which means Chicago flies to Denver, Denver flies Chicago, Chicago flies Denver, right? They just go back and forth with the same metal.
Okay.
So instead of having that plane go Chicago, Denver, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, back to Denver, right? They just use that same metal, which was helpful for us to identify crews that are on, say, Transcons out of Newark to San Francisco, that if this goes beyond 2 hours, then to get everyone boarded and the flights gated and everything off, because there was planes scattered, right? It wasn't as simple as everything was just sitting at a gate. There's flights at gates, there's flights that are on tarmacs, there's flights sitting in penalty boxes. So there's planes everywhere. Once we can get those started at those hubs, we knew these flights didn't matter. Just take them out now and let's rob those crews so that we could use them in closer in flights. So let's say a pilot has 10 hours worth of duty. We know in 10 hours they have no shot. So let's just cancel that flight, reassign them to a shorter amount of flight time, and then bring them back the next day on a out and back.
Does United have, or other airlines, when something like that happens, do you have a main objective? Is it
We do.
as many passengers there as possible? Is it cost? Is it the cruise?
It is not cost. It is 100% complete as much of the schedule as possible. That's rule number one. Number two, do everything in your power to recover the airline today. We don't want this to carry on for 2 or 3 days. And that's 1 and 2. There's no other priorities. Cost does not come into consideration. Operational performance, on time numbers, those don't come into the picture. To a certain extent, you want to keep bags with customers, but we know that you're going to have a high missed bag rate. That's acceptable. That's part of the triage. We know that gets costly to get those passengers' bags back where they were, whether they got to be delivered offline, trucked, or we have to just completely pay for the new bag. But that doesn't go into our factor. We want to be able to get the airline running, complete as much of the schedule as humanly possible, and try to recover as many passengers in that day. There's no magic number, though.
Okay. I'm really impressed. I mean, it's one of those industries where you just take it for granted. You show up and then your flight's 10 minutes late and people are like having a fit.
They are, yeah. I've spent 10 years on the ground side, and I can remember standing at a gate and, because management and leadership, when everything's going south, typically gets out on the floor and helps everybody work it all out. I've been standing in customer service counter lines, helping, try to work the line to break it up, and they're all mad at you, and you look out the window and the rain's blowing sideways, and there's lightning everywhere, and you can't fly in this. Do you want to fly in this? I think, is the question that I would ask sometimes, and I would just get really weird looks, but yes.
All right, it's really fast. You have questions, you gotta raise questions.
So I have a question. So because you're talking about the whole operations within United. So how did you connect it with the finance people from United for you guys not going to a chapter 11, like for instance, like La Tab, they went into chapter 11. So how did operations change?
So back to COVID.
Yeah.
So how did you?
Oh, okay.
90% drop.
Yep.
How did your workers survive a 90% drop?
There's a few things that happened. So we are a passenger demand industry. And so when passenger demand drops, you need less employees. So before we started going to the furlough place where we had to lay flight attendants or just employees across the entire system off, one of the first things that the entire company did on the management side was took a 20 to 40% pay cut. So we all just didn't get paid 20 to 40%, depending on your level. So that was one area in which you saved money. The second one is to drive as much variability in your labor workforce as humanly possible. So airlines are extremely fixed. So landing fees are a variable cost, but rents aren't. So you have a lot of brick and mortar locations in airlines because, well, they're airports. So try to drive as much variable cost as humanly possible. So what we did is we looked at things like our worker hours. The the number one or number two expense at an airline is going to be labor or fuel. It's one or the other. Well, fuel wasn't a problem because we weren't flying. So labor became the number one cost. And so you have contractual floors and ceilings that you can take your employee workforce to. So we took our flight attendant population all the way to the minimum guarantee number. And so in our contract, flight attendant gets guaranteed 71 hours worth of pay no matter what they fly. So if they fly or a minimum of 71 hours, if they fly 90 hours, they get paid 90 hours. But if they fly 30 hours, they get paid 71. And so that's based on their schedule. If they trade it all off, that's a different situation altogether. But we have to give them a schedule, and no matter what, they're going to get paid 71 hours or more, whichever's greater. That's for a line holder. For a reserve, it's 78 hours. So on the ground side, you have full-time employees, you have part-time employees. So the first move that we would make would take all of the full-time employees and make them part-time, and then take them to their contractual floor of hours they're required to work, and that's 20 hours a week. Couldn't go less than 20 hours a week. So that's how you create variability within your workforce, which is your number one cost. Anything on the fixed side, you're kind of stuck with. So beyond that, that's when government help went in. So what our finance team did before we went into the PSP, what it was called. I can't remember the acronym. I'm trying to forget those days. But the government funding that they gave all the airlines and a lot of businesses, government funding. Some of it was loans, some of it was grants. But before that, we started doing some interesting things. First off, we mortgaged our Mileage Plus program. And so that generated something like $5 billion worth of cash. We also then did some mortgaging on our parts, our gates, our routes. So we were able to generate a bunch of liquidity by basically selling off some of our fixed assets in the mortgage kind of route. And it allowed us to then, we want to get all that stuff back, but you got to pay off all of what you earned in that cash along the way. So generated a ton of liquidity there. And then all of the government funding allowed us to stay afloat while we waited for the passenger demand to come back. So it was an interesting time as it relates to not going bankrupt, but we had an interesting model. So I think when we went into the pandemic, we had something like $7 billion worth of cash. When we exited the pandemic, we were at something like $38 billion in cash. So the finance teams are trying to figure out where the appropriate balance is and how much cash you typically want to hold. You
said you went from 7 billion to 38 million or 38
billion, 38 billion. Yeah. 5x.
Cash afterwards than you went in.
We did, but we had mortgaged a lot of things off and took on a lot of debt too along the way. And so in the grand scheme of things, it's not the best position to be, but that was pure survival. And then you started cutting on all capital expenses, just went out the door. So there was going to be no reinvestment in anything for a year. We had a lot of things that we were trying to improve on our systems, lots of things we were doing across the company in our airports. Any sort of capital expenditure just was put on hold. And then you started giving a voluntary retirement programs. So we were getting employees, if they were ready to retire, we were giving them a small package, compensation package for them to retire. So the idea was shed as much headcount as you can. You needed to bring in money to keep payroll going, and you didn't do lots of your normal work that you would typically do on a day-to-day basis. That's how we avoided bankruptcy.
Did y'all talk during COVID that they could snap back fast and you couldn't find
We did. We actually spent probably 8 months working on, we actually called it snapback. Quite interesting that you use that term. It was snapback and then it turned into bounce back. So it was kind of both. But the idea was, all right, who's the long pole in the tent? What's the longest turnaround time to be able to get our frontline staffing back trained and legally qualified to be able to operate both pilots, which was the biggest constraint because pilots have to stay qualified by flying. We weren't flying, so simulation is not the way to go. Like the FAA says, you could have so many simulation hours, but you have to have it's called OE, operational experience, actually in the seat, and they have to do 26 hours in a month after they go unqualified. And so you also have to have a trainer that sits with them. So pilot training was the longest turnaround time. So that overall kind of cycle took a lot of planning to be able to get us to a place where we started bouncing back. We were ready to go.
Right. Maybe I'm always watching times because this is really interesting, boy, it's fascinating. But why don't we jump into our original core? We don't have to mention those, you know, we can mention Southwest or not.
That's okay.
But what did they miss something? Because obviously it hit them more than anybody else. Did they miss something? So they've seen it. I know they had a CEO change and all these kind of things in the press. This is an airline that's had a reputation, really good reputation, and suddenly. So what can you tell us? It's a risk management lesson from that experience.
So what I can tell you is what I know is what I've read. We don't have any other intel inside the industry than what we've all tried to read and learn. And even as I was asked about going here about specifically about Southwest, I asked even people that deal with like IR and some of our LR people, and all we have heard was that they had a legacy system basically crash, and they had no ideas where their crews were at all. And so they, if you have no insight into where your crews are dispersed around the system, it's very hard to operate. I would go so far as to say, not knowing that's coming is a surprise to me. And I'm not saying that is because they're a competitor to United Airlines. I just know that how much time I spent and spend even before that happened to Southwest, understanding our system risks, what the potential pitfalls are, and how we would work around it. And so, you know, if the system is in lag mode and it's struggling to kind of move along, you know that you have backups, and to just get hit right upside the head is very surprising to me. We've had plenty of outages and nothing that has been to that level of an extreme. So if I can give you my opinion, I would say that they didn't have insight into their crews, and they didn't have a mitigation strategy whatsoever to be able to get themselves out of it in the sense if the system was to fail, they would be able to work. And that's the best I can think of when I looked at anything with Southwest. Yes, like I think you even asked me early on if what is the thing that would just grind the airline to a halt? It would be if our mainframe just goes completely dark. But it hasn't been said that. It hasn't said, there's nothing in the news that said everything shut down. They just said they had system complications that went and had outages. That could be a number of things, but it hasn't been very clear to me. But I do find it very strange that they didn't see it coming or hadn't have signs of it happening along the way.
Well, it's the mitigation. It sounds like your mitigation is, you know, if the current, the most advanced systems break down, you still got the blue screens. Is the mitigation always more tech, or is there a manual call in? You know, is there any process that doesn't involve a computer system in case there is a complete system failure?
Yes, there is you have a snapshot where things gets captured of where your crews are at that moment in time. You wouldn't be able to get the airline running again, but it wouldn't lead to a week long of cancellations. You can get a computer snapshot where you're like, okay, everything went down. I know where all my crews are right now. And then everything becomes phone calls.
Oh, sorry. Arnold, don't mute. Sorry, someone's not
Nope,
muted.
nope.
I have a question. So you guys definitely had some problems with COVID. Here. I think you can. Could you talk a bit about the higher fuel prices last year and how you guys managed that?
Did I hear higher fuel prices and how you manage that?
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Look, fuel prices are just a product of your environment. So when you plan how you're gonna budget your overall operating costs, fuel is obviously one of them. We don't specifically track our operational expenses. We call it CASM X, so cost per available seat mile X fuel. And so the formula would be, all right, we want to hit our certain cost targets. And so the central finance teams are going to forecast fuel, and they're going to take a look at crack spread and what they're going to forecast in a range. And so that all manifests itself in earnings. You can read all our earnings report and you can see this is what we forecasted in fuel. You know, if it's $145 a barrel, all the Wall Street analysts will scrutinize that number if they don't agree with it. But you siphon off fuel costs versus all the other operational costs because it's the most volatile. And then you get cost targets that will account for inflation and deflation in your fuel. So you can balance out both without having to say, well, we missed our fuel by so much, but we didn't control any other costs anyways. So we didn't plan for it. So the way we planned for it, we get CASM X fuel cost targets that are going to account for inflation and deflation in the fuel price itself. So for example, if my cost per available seat mile target is down 1% versus say 2022, the central finance team is giving those targets to all the big operating groups and saying, all right, well, we know we have this much lag or this much growth in our fuel price based on the targets we gave the operating groups. Now, if your fuel price is going one way and costs are out of control, you're going to press down on the costs that are happening operational before you're going to try to account for fuel itself. One's controllable, one's uncontrollable. And we don't hedge at United. So we don't hedge fuel. And so, at least not to a large extent. So operational cost metrics are the ones that really control fuel price, if that makes any sense.
Thanks.
I have another question on the Southwest. Their mitigation, I'm curious if this is an issue of being overly cheap, that, you know, was this a massive expenditure they needed to do, or could they have, you know, this class studied ESCOT a few years ago, and weatherizing those plants cost money, but it wasn't that material. They just decided to save a few pennies. Is this a case of Southwest saving a few pennies, or did they really need to put some billions into this?
I can't tell you if that's exactly what Southwest did, but what I can tell you is that United definitely invests hundreds of millions of dollars into their computer-based system because it is, you know, the ipso facto heartbeat of the airline because everything is so technology-based. Yes, you have manual mitigation strategies, but you would rather not have to revert to those for long periods of time. So, you know, Southwest had a significantly built-in financial advantage for a number of years. They were profitable for something like 40 consecutive years pre-COVID. And lots of businesses chose to not invest in the things in the way they did once COVID happened. And I can speculate that Southwest was probably one of them because all the built-in cost advantages that they had with a lot of their contracts and their hedge profile started to wither away when you went into an environment where having a low-cost structure was such an advantage to them because wages and fuel was to their advantage. Now things are starting to even out. And so, yeah, they could have easily said, we're going to cut back in here, here, and here. And CapEx is usually a place where people cut back to try and save money. I couldn't tell you explicitly that's exactly what Southwest did. But what I can tell you explicitly is that even through the pandemic, when we started getting funds and cash back, we went to our core systems and ensured that those were stable before we went to something like raises or bonuses. You know, we invested in the core of the business on top of buying new airplanes. You know, that was well populated, that we have this groundbreaking deal with Boeing. We have all these deliveries coming with our United Next plan. And it is modernizing the fleet as well as modernizing your systems. And we never stopped doing that.
So I have another question. So going back to the field, which is what Wayland said, I guess like you guys hedge that by buying options or
This may be outside of your field, but United's, Southwest is well known for hedging fuel prices. Do you know United's strategy on that?
United does not hedge very much at all. Small kind of portfolio is hedged, but it's not largely done on hedging. It's definitely not my field, but I've been in enough discussions, strategy discussions, listen to the earnings call around Treasury enough. Treasury is the one that does a lot of the aspect when it comes to the hedge funds or the hedging profile. It's very small. I don't even know the percent. It's not very big. And it gets brought up a lot. Like when our CFO comes and talks to us quite a bit, a lot of people ask, why don't we hedge? We should be hedging. Why don't we do that? And he's been very clear by saying all of our analysis has told us that fuel is so volatile that hedging doesn't work out the way people think it does. It's not always like we bought so low and we hedged and now we have a 30-year advantage. Fuel is super volatile. And so there's a lot of times that companies are on the other end of it where they would much rather not have what they paid for that barrel of oil. So they completely went away from that model for probably like a decade.
I think Southwest had some pretty serious losses when fuel prices fell. And you have the advantage on the upside. On the downside, it's actually a disadvantage. It's hard to hedge. So you win one way, you don't lose the other way. I got two more risks I want to hit, and then I have so many questions I probably should just let the students ask, but I want to ask on the pilot thing. That's an industry problem, but it's a United problem. How in the world do you mitigate that risk? Because you really can't control that very much.
I think you can do a couple of things. One, you have to be attractive. You have to be an attractive place for pilots to want to work. So it comes down to recruiting. So to attract pilots to your company, what can you offer? Well, one, you can offer a really quick rise through the organization, because if you're growing at this rate, that means you can go from a first officer on a 737-700 to a captain on a 737 to, a first officer on a 757 all the way up to a 767 within 3 to 5 years, which is lightning fast to get to a wide body first officer or captain in that short of time. But when you're growing at that rate, those routes are going to be there because there's just so much more of them. So that's very attractive. And one of the things that United has done when it comes to just competition in the marketplace is a lot of these legacy carriers dumped their wide body fleets. Delta got rid of a significant portion of their 777 fleet. We didn't. And so when everything started bouncing back, we've now dominate the Atlantic. So if you look at numbers, this was actually just quoted when we were looking at our upcoming schedule build. Since 2019, we are 48% larger in the Atlantic, over the Atlantic. The rest of the industry is down 1%. So that's an attractive measure to pilots to come work at United, because you get to fly long haul international flights that are younger age. Yeah, it won't be upon hire, but it won't be 15 years. So that's one. Number two, there's the contractual negotiations are trying to rise wages. So there's always this leapfrogging in the industry of wage. So United wants to continue paying industry leading wages. So that obviously is why people want to work. We work for money. And so that's a very strong recruiting tactic as well. And so I think last year alone, United hired 2,500 pilots. I think there was 7,500 pilots that were able to be hired, and United hired 2,500 of them. And so it becomes a game of what can you offer in places others can't. And, you know, the traditional sense of having to wait 10 years to become a wide body captain is kind of over, and you can get there faster. And the only way you can get there faster is having more available opportunities. And United does that. That's one. So schedule, wages, and we started about 2-3 years back, a pilot academy. And so that's the Aviate program. So there's an actual schoolhouse in Arizona. And the intent is to be able to grow and train your own pilots. It certainly is a big part of our DE&I effort. We want to be able to bring a more diverse pilot workforce in as well. So that enables that, which is also another recruiting tactic that people want to come and fly at United, because we are leading the industry when it comes to a diverse workforce, specifically in the most skilled ones, such as pilots. So 3 areas in which we've done a lot of work to attract talent, and it's working.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because it's almost a zero sum. If you're successful, someone else is failing. So it's a little worrisome for those looking at the industry as a whole. But it's
Well,
kind of the trucking industry is having, you know, there's just not enough people. So who wins and who loses?
That's a very interesting point. It's one of those that, well, low cost carriers are going to lose because they're just not going to be able to keep up because they're not going to have pilots. So if you can't grow, if low cost carriers can't grow and their cost profiles matching, if their fares are matching a legacy company, people are going to pick the legacy company because they have just a better network. That's one thing. So
like a Ryanair, I mean, they're killing it, but do they have serious problems getting pilots?
they're going to, yeah, everyone's going to, right? Right.
Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, everyone's going to have a serious problem sourcing pilots. That's absolutely true. So what the consumer's worry would be is, well, there's going to be less airlines. That's true. There'll be less airlines, but the smaller the number will become bigger as a whole. So you just start capturing more and more market share, which I think is the intent of growing and taking over specific markets like Chicago, for example. Our number one competitor is American Airlines. Well, we want to continue to gobble up all of the Chicagoland area to the place where American is the size of Delta here, which is very small. Doesn't mean that the consuming public won't have options to fly. The option will just be United.
I got one last reservoir question. Joe had. I'll see one question. All right, so this may not be your area of expertise, but we were just talking with Taylor, talking about the airlines industry is a great example of good risk management. So when you think risk with airlines, obviously it's crashes, and I watch the airline crash TV shows. I think they're incredibly fascinating. I always like the one where they're interviewing the pilot at the beginning, because I know a lot of people survived, if not all. What we talked about is the importance of not just looking at serious events, but even scrutinizing the near misses, the close calls. I don't know how much you know about that, but I don't know if it's as good as those shows say it is, but it looks like it's a fairly detailed FAA that you take this really seriously. Is that true? Does the airline really scrutinize? Do y'all make sure you learn every single event? Is United every airline? Is this something that is serious as the airline at least has reputation for?
I would say that I've worked for one airline, and it's United, and it is the number one value that we stress across the board in any part of the operation. Safety is, we live by something called 4-4. So that's safe, caring, reliable, and efficient. And safety is always number one. And so we have a significant number of safety metrics that we follow. So everything that you read, everything you see in those shows are absolutely true. I mean, it is part of the culture. I mean, even to stress the amount of safety that we focus on, even before we start a meeting at a corporate headquarters, we have to do a safety briefing. We have to talk about what are the exits, who is CPR qualified, if there's an active shooter, what to do. Every single meeting, we're required to have that safety briefing. So when you get to in the cockpit or the crew itself in the cabin, those safety procedures are foundational, and there's no shortcuts. In the tech ops side, in the crew, in the cabin, in the cockpit. So everything that you read there and see there is 100% true. Now, as it relates to the things that are taught in the cockpit, I have very little exposure to that. Same thing even on the crew side. But I mean, we practice ditching aircraft in the pool. I mean, that's happens in recurrent training. So I mean, even something that is mostly a doom-ridden scenario, we train and practice for it.
Does the airline lobby the areas you don't control, TSA, the controllers? I mean, TSA is not doing their job, it's gonna flow through to you, or is that something you just say, we don't touch that? Is that an industry trade group that does that kind of thing, or do y'all not get involved? Or do you may not know?
I have no idea. Yeah, I couldn't tell you that I've had conversations with TSA about getting passengers through their lines, but I've never had a conversation as it relates to what kind of protocol, how are they governed, things like that. No.
It is an industry that just, if that's, all the safety is the way, it sounds like it really is, that this industry just has to get safer over time. Like our industry, which is finance, that just seems to get more and more dangerous over time.
Right. Yeah, that's the truth.
Part we had is how to get the lessons learned from airlines into finance, because there's such different businesses.
Yeah, credit default swaps and subprime mortgages and all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like we're making the plane more dangerous on purpose because we get paid more, because people need us more. It's kind of the opposite incentive. This is right. This is really interesting. Is there any risk or any area, maybe specific to your job or something, that you would think a finance person needs to understand this industry, really understanding how this industry works?
My dogs are going crazy.
Oh, all right. Yeah, other questions? I'm just so interested.
Sorry, I think the Amazon guy came or something. And
Okay.
So ask that question again.
So anything we haven't discussed, these are finance majors. I always tell them, if you're going to be good in finance, you better know your industry. What's the inside scoop? Could be risk, could be other things. I mean, you made a good point about that. This is a complex engine's got to run. What should a finance? Let's say if someone starts, you got Matthew there. Matthew is a great student here, so I'm sure he's doing great there. I always talk about like Chuck Yeager, that he was a great test pilot because he's also a mechanic, so he knew both sides.
Mm-hmm.
What should we know about the airlines industry to make us great finance employees?
Okay, so part of my background is I do have a business degree, and I am an MBA. I'm in a financial MBA, so I do love finance, and I spent about 4 years in finance when I was responsible for all global ops staffing. So I owned all of the financial profile for airports. I guess you could say I was the labor controller on the financial side. And what I will tell you, if you want to understand and be able to be a good financial partner for operational groups in any company, it is, and to know what financial risks there would be associated with your job, you need to get your best understanding of the business at hand, the core business. So that means you're going to have to spend time in the field, in the operation, in the plant, in whatever industry that you're working in, to know why things happen and why things work. So it is being in a financial role, especially at a massive company like United, your best skill set is going to be how influential you are for people to be comfortable with change. And there's a lot of risk in low margin industries like an airline with the way financials are held. and being able to pick apart when investment is silly and could put the company at financial risk, than when the investment will generate a return. And I could use an example in my own experience in my career that my expertise helped get the financial figures correct. So we were going through the AFE process for a brand new baggage system in Houston. And this baggage system in Houston was going to be upwards of $400 million. So that's not a small number, right? I think the break-even year was like, it was like a 30-year MPV, just a really big exercise. And a lot of their assumptions were grounded upon improvement of missed bag rates. So if a bag costs on average $200 for whatever reason, if it gets lost or missed and you got to pay for some delivery fee, let's just say $200 was the number. The assumptions were that we would reduce our missed bag rate in Houston by 75% to make a 30-year MPV palatable. Well, the first question I would ask is, well, how many less bags are being missed? And then as you grow the schedule, is a 75% reduction on a schedule that's growing 5 to 10% even realistic in the first place? And they said, well, yes, it is. So I said, all right, let's see your system today. So I flew down to Houston, I got on a tractor, and I watched the process. And what I found was that their process in the first place was riddled with inefficiency, and you could probably just build 75% of the new system that they wanted and still get the same result they were going to get, because they were never going to reach a 75% reduction in missed bags in Houston. They can improve that number right now and not spend $400 million. But even if you spent $250 million, the best you can possibly do, even when you improve the current process, is probably 20% MBR, missed bag rate. And so being able to poke holes in that could potentially save you hundreds of millions of dollars and mitigate financial risk for the long term.
Yeah, I agree with it. I like the idea of walking through it. You know, it can be United Airlines meet Kroger's grocery store or whatever it is. It's, to me, it's almost understanding the finance of a particular, you talk about available seat miles, you know, just the finances of a flight, the finances of a flight at a particular hub, you know, just understanding the difference. But it's such an it's a tough industry because it's so capital intensive, a lot of labor issues, and yet we use it so much. So you know, I'm a big United fan. I use United all the time. Any final questions? And Anna has a question.
So it sounds good that you guys are ready to mitigate risk similar, related to like tech issues and software failures, but ever since COVID happened, you guys constantly run like scenarios or similar macro level events. What are that like impact your companies?
So I think I heard, do we run scenarios post-COVID that allows us to understand where our risks are? Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
Are you preparing for another COVID-like event, or can you prepare for another COVID-like event?
I will say that losing 95% of your capacity is there's nothing you can do to prepare for that. I mean, like lots of people are going to get laid off, or we need lots of government funding to keep us alive, because no one can operate that way. You just went on I want to say we were on like a $20 million a day cash burn. It was crazy. So, but yes, to answer your question, even before COVID, we do probably 2 or 3 exercises a year and saying, all right, how much risk do we have and what do we need to do to mitigate it? And all of our analysis across the board always said we should have anywhere from $6 to $8 billion worth of cash on hand to be able to get us through whatever that was. And that was a, you know, double the size September 11th type of scenario where we lose, you know, 4 airplanes instead of 2. And, you know, COVID was just hopefully once in a multi-generational event. But yes, we're constantly doing cost exercises, mitigation exercises, to say if A, B, or C all happened together, or A happened on its own, or A happened and B happened down the road. This is what you need financially to operate, and here's what the levers you need to pull are to get through it. I would say the next one that we have now is we just started working on looking at 2026, and if we have put all this investment into the company right now to prepare for a really large schedule in 2026, and let's say talent acquisition doesn't deliver the headcount that we need, and you have all this incremental capacity that you can't do with it, what do you do with it? Does it sit there? And so those are some of the questions that you're working with. So, it sounds like a good problem, but the last thing you want is to have a bunch of airplanes sitting there with doing nothing, because it's just an asset that just is depreciating and you can't do anything with, and you can't generate any revenue out of it. And so those are the scenarios that you want to look through.
Anything else? We have a couple minutes. One last one, Carlos.
It's a personal question. What do you think happens to Malaysian flight 37?
Oh, I watched that documentary, by the way. I honestly think that pilot, flew that thing into the South Pacific and committed suicide. That's what I think. And there was the 3 scenarios they put in there. I never gave it a second thought. I remember when that happened because I had to fly to London like 3 days later on a 777. And I was like, there's something wrong with these planes. So I was a little worried about that. But as it relates to that scenario, it seems to me that there's really no other thing in my mind that was, I don't think it was flown to Russia. I don't think it was hijacked by going to the eBay underneath the first class cabin. But if I tied 2 things together, the FBI confiscated that simulator. He simulated a flight going into the South Pacific, somewhere near where they thought the plane went. It was certainly a complete bumble of errors of not knowing where to look for the plane in the first place. I did find it interesting that no one wanted to follow up on the lady that found something in the ocean that looked like an airplane part. That was interesting to me. But one of the reasons why they were striking it out, which didn't really align in my line of thinking, was, well, there's been plenty of examples where a pilot committed mass murder, but none of them took 6 hours. And I guess the question is, do we know it took 6 hours? I mean, he could have taken a cyanide pill and, released the cabin pressure, put everyone to sleep, put a cyanide pill and went to sleep. You don't know. That's what I honestly think happened. If you were to ask me, you asked my opinion, that's what I think.
Yeah, and it brings up, after 9/11, they started locking the cabins, and then you have that one suicide pilot that used that to crash the plane because the other pilot couldn't get back in. So, you can't think of every single, 2 pilots collude to do something. There's no way. There's nothing you can do.
Right.
Think of everything you can think of, and it's not going to be a perfect world. But all right, well, Mike, I'll let you go, man. It's been really good. I really appreciate your time. It's been very excellent. So thanks.
Thanks for having me. Yep. Hope this was helpful. Appreciate being invited. So thank you. Have a good rest of your class.